Welcome to MojoPlays, and for this special presentation, we are counting down the 20 hardest games on each PlayStation console, starting with the PlayStation 1 and moving to the PlayStation 5. Let's get into it.
Rayman. If Rayman's hands were still attached to his body, I'd rip them the fuck off. Despite the franchise's evolution over the years, the original Rayman remains one of the toughest games of the 90s and arguably one of the hardest platformers ever created. Unlike other platformers that offer rewarding gameplay through precise movements like Crash Bandicoot, Rayman's challenges often feel extremely unfair, like Crash Bandicoot if you didn't have any arms or legs. King's Field. Even seasoned Dark Souls players will be taken aback by the sheer difficulty of King's Field. It's so hard that it's been retroactively added to the Souls-like genre. King's Field was quite innovative for its time, which meant many players were unsure of how to approach it when they first played. We recommend carefully. The game's ambitious 3D visuals and resulting glitches only added to the difficulty, while its brutal combat, numerous traps, confusing controls, and complete lack of guidance made even hardcore RPG fans question their life choices. Parappa the Rapper.
Yeah. Well, what do we have here? Plenty of munchies for everyone, right?
Many people recognize the catchy music of Parappa the Rapper, and its distinctive cutout art style has aged remarkably well as it is somewhat timeless. However, those who play the game for themselves will be surprised by how challenging it still is. While rhythm games typically focus on timed button presses, Parappa the Rapper elevates this difficulty to an extreme. Later levels become nearly impossible to conquer, requiring players to refine their reflexes to perfection to progress. Try combining Guitar Hero with someone throwing molten hot darts at the back of your head.
I will try to sell a cap like this.
I can sell a bottle cap like this.
Blasto. To be fair to Blasto, this PS1 action game was likely released before the technology of the time could fully support its ambitions. I feel similarly about myself. I feel like I was born before my dry, shitty sense of humor could be appreciated appropriately. Blasto is known as one of the PS1's most notorious games for causing broken controllers. The game's sluggish movement and unreliable camera make even basic tasks difficult, and the lack of barriers in many levels means players often find themselves falling to their deaths while trying to navigate simple jumps, which feels realistic because jumping sucks. Einhander. Much like the hardest games on the NES and the SNES, Einhander was a throwback to the classic 2D shoot-em-ups, and though not the most challenging 2D shoot-em-up ever created, Einhander managed to trick PS1 users who were unprepared for this classic gaming style level of difficulty. Instead of simply overwhelming players with a high volume of enemies, Einhander boosts the health of each enemy and requires navigating some extremely perilous areas. This design choice is particularly evident in the boss fights, which feel almost like a 2D Star Fox on crack. Twisted Metal 2.
So, exactly 1 year ago on Christmas Eve, my Twisted Metal contest destroyed the City of Angels. Down below, life has come to a halt as survivors struggle to stay alive.
Although the first Twisted Metal game is considered notoriously difficult, fans of the series seem to agree unanimously that the second entry is without a doubt the hardest. The second game in the series received praise for its larger levels and additional characters. The actual gameplay can be quite challenging, and it's worth noting that Twisted Metal 2 features a misleading easy mode. Playing in this setting will stop you early in the game and prevent you from progressing to the end, which feels like a slap in the face, which is what you deserve for playing on easy difficulty.
As winner, his ultimate wish would be granted. The Your wish is granted, driver. But the world had been reduced to rubble during the Twisted Metal contest. There was nothing. No one left to rule over.
Alundra. In Alundra, the top-down camera view often made navigating the varying elevations a challenging exercise in trial and error. Imagine living your life in top-down. Way harder, right? While this was a design flaw, it's not the only thing that contributes to the game's difficulty. Alundra is notorious for its demanding backtracking. Attention to detail is crucial, and even the most meticulous players may find themselves frustrated by its complexities. I, for one, had a pen and paper when I was a kid and made a map that made no sense and ended up being torn up through tears. Irritating Stick.
Welcome to Irritating Stick!
Irritating Stick sits pretty comfortably on this list, as although it's not the hardest, it often comes into players' minds when remembering grueling PS1 experiences. Players must navigate a small ball through intricate themed mazes with very little room for error. To increase the challenge, you're also racing against a relentlessly ticking clock, which feels like added pressure we didn't really need. True mastery of this game requires hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of hours of dedicated playtime, often beating the stamina of even the heartiest gamers. Incredible Crisis. Remember that scene in Metal Gear Solid where you had to repeatedly mash the circle button to survive the torture device? Remember how the pain from the constant tapping would run right up your arm? Remember thinking, how on earth can tapping one button cause this much pain? Now imagine that experience stretched across an entire game. That's Incredible Crisis. But don't think for a second that you'll get reprieve when you aren't tapping, because the game offers plenty of other ways to break your brain while giving your arm a break. Oddworld Abe's Odyssey. As a down-to-its-core puzzle game, Oddworld requires a significant amount of thinking outside the box, as with any puzzle platformer. However, the game raises the difficulty even further with some of the most ruthless level designs in PlayStation history. Your margin for error is extremely minimal, as constant gunfire and traps pose a continuous threat. And throughout the campaign, you'll more than often find yourself repeating every single encounter, and a first-time win for any encounter is almost always dumb luck.
Wait. Okay.
Fear Effect. The original Fear Effect games are challenging to play today for various reasons, including casual racism and odd softcore cutscenes that we always got nervous watching as kids. If my old man walked in while I was playing Fear Effect, he'd have a lot of questions. Questions like, can I have a turn? And don't tell your mum, okay? Fear Effect was also notoriously difficult, which is what we should really be focusing on. Combining Resident Evil style controls with point-and-click adventure puzzles and clumsy stealth segments, Fear Effect represents a collection of some of the most frustrating and demanding gameplay concepts of its time. It's Hugo's House of Horrors meets Silent Hill hard mode meets Clock Tower with one hand meets Alone in the Dark with your eyes shut. Driver. In Driver, you are introduced to the game's concepts with one of the most arduous and frustrating tutorial levels ever created, performing maneuvers with endgame levels of skill and precision in one of the tightest, tiniest, and most rage-inducing maps. To make things even more frustrating, the game often fails to recognize when you've successfully completed a maneuver, meaning you might not pass the level even if you've mastered the game's toughest moves from the start. If you've never managed to beat Driver's opening level, you might be surprised to discover that later levels can present even tougher difficulty spikes. I never found out.
You the man. We gonna need you.
Blood Omen Legacy of Kain. Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, the first game in the classic Legacy of Kain series, offers a unique gameplay experience that is nothing like later entries. This top-down hack-and-slash adventure mixes intense Diablo-style action with puzzle solving that feels borderline abusive. The game remains highly challenging to this day due to the constant onslaught of enemies, as well as various traps that deplete Kain's health almost instantly. Even with his extensive arsenal of weapons, items, and vampiric abilities, Kain's quest will end in screaming again and again and again, which feels almost like justice considering how he treats us in Soul Reaver.
Grinning malignantly at me through blackened teeth.
It is not often that a man sees his own corpse.
Vagrant Story. For years, fans have considered Vagrant Story one of the most underrated PlayStation games and one of the most overlooked RPGs ever made. And although it's finally getting the appreciation it deserves with its re-release and a whole new generation of gamers enjoying it, it's also beating the ever-loving crap out of a whole new generation of gamers with its brutal difficulty. The challenge stems from mastering its unique combat system, which can often make you feel helpless. Even after grasping the basics, the game's relentless bosses, clever traps, and even the so-called basic enemies will keep you questioning whether you can ever truly master it. Ninja Shadow of Darkness. This is one of those games that's difficult due to notoriously cheap and unfair game mechanics, making progress feel almost impossible. Although a save feature is available, it only saves your exact position, which means if you're out of lives or continues, you must attempt to complete the game with no further chances. Coupled with the game's brutal controls, poor camera angles, hard to see graphics, platforming hazards, and persistent enemies, the majority of the deaths you'll experience are because of unintentional bad game design rather than an intentional challenge. Mortal Kombat Mythologies, Sub-Zero. In Mythologies, Sub-Zero battles enemies in a style reminiscent of classic Mortal Kombat games. However, the game is infamous for its abundance of instant death traps, which deplete Sub-Zero's life faster than Goro ever could. From collapsing columns to rotating platforms in the Wind Temple, Mythologies is notorious for consuming lives at an alarming rate. But don't think for a second that the fighting is easy, because the boss battles throughout this game offer some of the hardest Mortal Kombat challenges an MK fan can experience to date. Crash Bandicoot. You know, this is somewhat embarrassing to admit, but when I was only about 7 years old, almost all of my PS1 controllers had little dents in them. When asked what they were, I had to admit that they were bite marks, as Crash Bandicoot was so unbelievably difficult that I found biting the controller to be my only outlet for rage. Despite their linear design, the Crash Bandicoot games require a level of platforming precision that was exceptionally challenging at the time, but the first game, with its less refined controls, was undoubtedly the most difficult of the PS1 trilogy. Heart of Darkness.
Let's see if you're more alert in the dark. You can spend the rest of the hour in the cupboard.
You can't shut me up in there. I know my rights. My uncle's a lawyer.
And mine's a judge. Get in there.
The relatively unknown Heart of Darkness could easily compete with Driver for the title of most notoriously difficult opening levels. The initial section bombards you with enemies like a bullet hell shooter, but the controls feel like a cumbersome puzzler. Even if you're familiar with the game, responding to the fast-paced action on screen is exceptionally challenging. The game doesn't get much easier after this either, but you'll never find out because you'll sell your PS1 for anxiety medication well before you found a modicum of success in this opening section. Tomb Raider 3. With a boxy design and the rage-inducing tank controls, Tomb Raider felt like a game that didn't belong in its parameters, yet it somehow worked. And although Tomb Raider 1 and 2 were hard, Tomb Raider 3 takes difficulty to a whole new level with its abundance of spikes, boulders, pits, and traps designed to end your run before you're prepared. The game's perplexing level design aims to simulate the disorientation of navigating a dark tomb, and boy does it, because I am lost all the damn time. Tenchu Stealth Assassins. While difficulty is expected in many stealth titles or stealth sections of titles, we're looking at you, Spider-Man, Tenchu Stealth Assassins sometimes oversteps by constantly reminding you of your vulnerability. Perhaps it's because many of us were excited to play as a badass ninja assassin, but Tenchu's insistence on cautious trial and error gameplay left many players frustrated and questioning their strategies. Tenchu Stealth Assassins is by all accounts a decent game with great reviews, yet somehow it remained at the bottom of my game collection because it released a toxic side of myself I never want to see again.
Chaos Legion.
The time has come. It's time to show you the abyss of the darkness.
The early 2000s experienced a renaissance of action hack-and-slash titles, but that doesn't mean all of them would necessarily hold your hand throughout. Chaos Legion introduced several interesting mechanics to the mix in which the player isn't fighting alone, and instead joined by various legions which the player can issue commands to. However, this also comes at the cost of the player's speed and power, leaving them more vulnerable when their legion is summoned. The game will routinely send hordes of enemies the player's way, and with many of the arenas amounting to nothing more than cramped corridors, it's all too easy to become overwhelmed. Full of forced grinding just to match the enemy's levels, as well as a system that punishes players upon death by sending them back to the most recent intermission screen, but with only half the XP they'd earned, this chaos is not for the faint-hearted.
The sinner shall be atoned, even though no punishment will be enough for your sin.
Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne.
As of now, your will to live shall sustain you. Believe in it and survive.
These days, the Shin Megami Tensei series is more widely recognized as the edgy cousin to the more popular Persona series. But those familiar with the franchise are die-hard loyalists even when the series routinely kicks their asses. SMT's third entry in particular can be especially difficult for those unfamiliar with the game's systems versus those coming in from the Persona series to see where it all began. Nocturne's battle system relies heavily on negotiating with the many monsters and demons you encounter and coercing them to fight alongside you. However, even with those additional forces at your side, the game will routinely throw you into battles that can easily insta-kill your entire party and bosses who aren't above exploiting the player's vulnerabilities. The recent HD remaster even added new difficulty options to ease newcomers into the series and one of its most challenging entries.
We shall meet again, if fate so desires.
Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter. The Breath of Fire series already challenged its many fans, but Dragon Quarter managed to weed out even some of the series' seasoned pros. Dragon Quarter introduced returning players to a new battle system that it also seemed to expect them to know everything about right away, despite the game still teaching them mechanics well into the first couple hours. Even those who managed to power through these early challenges were met by bosses that could easily make them feel like they missed an important tutorial along the way. The game was also designed in a way so that players were basically forced into replaying the title to experience the entire story as intended. And given how much of a struggle the game could be even on a single playthrough, that was a big ask of even the most devoted fan. Airblade.
Dude, tell me you were watching. I was pulling some bitchin' moves back there.
Tony Hawk initiated a deluge of extreme sports titles, and while some of them saw great success, not all attempts to shake up the formula were successful. Just before they were crashing cars better than anyone else in the industry, Criterion Games tried their hand at a Tony Hawk-inspired extreme sports title and used Back to the Future 2's hoverboard to do it. However, whereas the Tony Hawk games were focused on nailing the perfect grind or narrowly landing that sick trick, Airblade ramped up the difficulty in its challenges by demanding nothing less than perfection from its players. With stringent time limits placed on the player and with multiple objectives to complete before the timer ran out, failure was equally punished with the player restarting the level from scratch. There were certainly some decent ideas in Airblade, but few made it past the opening levels to experience them.
Shoot, it's like Escape Boom, you know? I'm the sidewalk assassin, man. The tarmac Terminator. Nobody can stop me.
Devil May Cry 3, Dante's Awakening.
To be honest, I'm expecting something a little better than this.
Dante and the Devil May Cry series was a shot of adrenaline for action fans, and even though the Demon Hunter's second outing was a resounding disappointment, Devil May Cry 3 had Dante return in top form. However, Capcom might have overcorrected after complaints that the second entry was too easy, as the story of Dante and Virgil's origins managed to beat the ever-loving crap out of even the most dedicated Devil May Cry fan, as Capcom made the bizarre decision to have the Japanese hard mode be North America's normal setting. The decision was so criticized that Capcom even released a new version of the game in the West that tweaked the game's difficulty and added checkpoints to make it a bit more manageable. Even with this new iteration, however, DMC3 is still regarded as one of the most difficult games in the franchise.
Sorry, but this is no place for a little girl, so beat it.
Beautiful Joe.
Head to the go-go, baby!
Beautiful Joe might just be one of the PS2's most inventive and downright gorgeous platformers, but its slick and stylish visuals hide a devilishly difficult game. Joe is imbued with several powers to combat the many enemies he encounters, such as slow, speed, and zoom. But, much like the ghosts and goblins of old, Beautiful Joe won't hesitate to remind Joe how human he truly is. With random difficulty spikes and enemies that instantly punish the player and Joe for any minor slip-up, the game demands almost pixel-perfect precision from its players immediately after the game's tutorial. The game will also routinely send nearly endless waves of enemies, all with screen-filling attacks and combos. It can be difficult to keep up with all the action unfolding and all too easy to become overwhelmed and take a number of what should have been avoidable hits.
Wait a minute. Wasn't I supposed to be the main character here?
Grandia Extreme. Shin Megami Tensei 3 wasn't the only challenging RPG on the PS2, as the more action-heavy entry in the Grandia series, Grandia Extreme, levied its difficulty not through complicated mechanics, but by the massive number of enemies and challenges the game throws at them. Having more in common with the Dynasty Warriors series than its namesake, Extreme would often throw countless mindless drones at the player, attempting to overload them with sheer numbers. The game also further hinders the player by limiting their movements with a tank control-like system when it clearly needed something more omnidirectional. The game compensates for some of these oversights by giving players far more customization than any other game in the series, but even with everything fine-tuned to the player's preferences, the game still challenges not only the player's skills, but their patience as well. Alien Hominid. Before there was Cuphead, there was Alien Hominid. Based on the Flash game of the same name, Alien Hominid makes it clear invading Earth is no easy task even for a being capable of intergalactic flight. Battling an unending stream of government agents, any of which can instantly kill you with a single well-placed shot, the chaos erupting on screen is more reminiscent of the bullet hell shooters than the cutesy platformer the game presents itself as. With enemy projectiles flying in from all corners of the screen, even the various power-ups and later abilities do little to slow the relentless onslaught, preventing the titular alien from reclaiming his ship. The game also isn't great about letting players know about key features such as the all-important double jump, which can prove life-saving in the game's later stages. The addition of co-op only adds to the number of broken controllers. Ring of Red. Strategy games already ask a lot from players, and expect them to plan their moves as if the game was a chessboard, and they need to see the enemy movements coming at least 3 moves ahead. But even by these expected standards, Ring of Red can still easily crush even the best laid plans. Ring of Red adds yet another wrinkle to tactical gameplay by forcing players to line up their attacks manually, leaving much of the chance of their strategy in their hands and their ability to properly aim their shots. The game's super intelligent and aggressive AI doesn't make things any easier either. Enemy forces can quickly dismantle your plans in mere seconds and leave you scrambling to recover, which in turn can affect how accurate your shots are. Ring of Red thrives on the player's anxiety, and wastes no time applying as much pressure as possible to simulate its mech-based war tactics. Twisted Metal Black.
He said he ran some kind of crazy contest. If I won his game, he promised to show me how to bring an end to the curse.
The Twisted Metal series is known for its bombastic car combat and darkly twisted characters, but most would agree that Calypso's first car carnage competition on the PS2 was one of the most challenging. While the core mechanics of the game remain unchanged, destroy your opponents with outlandish vehicles and weapons before they do the same to you, the AI in Twisted Metal Black was notoriously more aggressive than ever before. If you don't constantly maintain your health and have a near perfect knowledge of the layout of the map and its many useful power-ups, you're going to be in for a rough time. Most wouldn't even consider tackling this entry on hard difficulty unless they're just looking for a reason to smash a controller. Good thing this was still during the era of cheat codes. Jak 2.
It's your old pal Daxter, remember?
Daxter?
What the heck was that? Sheesh! Remind me not to piss you off.
Naughty Dog made a name for themselves with the Crash series, and while those games could be challenging in their own right, Naughty Dog's first foray onto PS2 with Jak and Daxter the Precursor Legacy was a decidedly more laid-back affair. However, when the sequel Jak 2 was released 2 years later, more than just the world had changed.
Okay, I swear, that's the last time I ever touch any stupid precursor crap!
Jak 2 went full GTA and featured gunplay and carjacking alongside its platforming sections, and while the game was still a lot of fun, those looking for a simple cutesy platformer were in for quite a surprise. With a significantly darker tone, a stingy checkpoint system, random difficulty spikes, and enemies just looking for a reason to one-shot you, Jak 2 completely flipped the script on fan expectations and created a platformer so difficult, many didn't or couldn't see it through to the end.
Let me just break a few more things and see if anything pops loose. Boom! Gotcha! Like candy from a baby.
Armored Core: Last Raven. Just because Dark Souls wasn't the worldwide phenomenon it is today back on the PS2, doesn't mean FromSoft wasn't still finding ways to challenge players. While fans of the Dark Souls series are familiar with FromSoft's lack of hand-holding nowadays, back on the PS2, this was not a common practice, and Last Raven dropped players into a heavily armored mech and wished them the best of luck before unceremoniously kicking them onto the battlefield. The Armored Core titles have always been a bit more of a hardcore mech series, but Last Raven took things to a whole new level, expecting players to instantly master complex commands, all while an AI that clearly understands the game better than the player is mercilessly beating them into scrap.
Good job, Raven.
Maximo goes to glory.
Take the general away and torture him until he dies. Maximo. Your fate will not be so pleasant.
Considering that Maximo Ghosts to Glory is based on the Tough as Nails Ghosts and Goblins games on the NES, there really isn't much of a surprise that a 3D modernization is on this list. Even within a new generation, Ghosts to Glory still manages to keep up the traditions set in place by its predecessor's release, and Maximo can still end up fighting in his skivvies should he take too much damage. And he will be taking an awful lot of damage. Death isn't even the end for our hero, however, as he can be resurrected using death coins provided by death itself. But every time Maximo perishes, the cost of resurrection increases. Combine the relentless assault from all manner of enemies just itching to literally cut Maximo down to size, and platforming sections that require near perfect precision, and Maximo is going to need more coins than he can carry to complete his quest.
This may sting a bit.
Let's do it.
Give him hell, kid.
God Hand.
Well, your sexy little friends. They're coming for a dance.
They're still sexier than you are.
Shinji Mikami is nothing if not a madman. After essentially godfathering the survival horror genre with Resident Evil, and then revolutionizing it again with Resident Evil 4, Shinji's final title with Capcom was God Hand, and even with his illustrious career, it was unlike anything he'd done before. What at first appeared to be a standard beat-em-up ended up being much deeper and more difficult than anyone expected. Repurposing and reinventing the old tank controls of the early Resident Evil days, players need to learn an honestly ridiculous number of combos and adjust their fighting style on the fly to defeat the various enemy types they're faced with. The title was moderately well received upon its initial release, but has since garnered a following with those looking for a challenging yet rewarding beat-em-up. Guitar Man. Rhythm games might have faded into obscurity in recent years, but Guitar Man was keeping the beat going before Guitar Hero oversaturated the market. While most rhythm games are generally regarded as a relaxing time, unless you're playing on Expert, Guitar Man said hold my pick and stepped onto the stage. Before the age of plastic guitars, Guitar Man combined the analog stick and button prompts often at the same time to lay down his chords. And did we mention that every song is also a battle to the death? You and your rival are quite literally in a battle of the bands, and on higher difficulties, the more often you mess up, the more damage you deal to yourself, as well as leaving yourself open to attack from your opponent. Guitar Man gives play for your life a whole new meaning. Contra, Shattered Soldier. Contra is a name synonymous with difficulty. Growing up, there were many who never would have finished the original NES title had it not been for the Konami code. Don't let the new coat of paint and fancy graphics fool you. This is still Contra at its core. Shattered Soldier switches up the standard formula by sidelining power-ups in favor of rapid weapon switching, but everything else is strictly Contra, which means an absolute metric ton of live, die, repeat as you learn enemy placement, level design, and boss patterns. Shattered Soldier also features multiple endings based on the player's performance, so expect quite a lot of trial and error as you try to unlock the game's best ending. At the very least, the Konami code is still present to give you an extra boost starting out. Manhunt.
You're not dead. Well, not yet, anyway. You get a second chance. Another throw of the dice.
Stealth games are a bit of a mixed bag. While you have some that have instant fail states should you be caught, others give you options to adapt a new strategy should the alarm bells start ringing. Manhunt falls into a very weird middle category. While you can technically recover from being spotted, the chances of your survival in a one-on-one conflict after the fact are nearly non-existent. And the game is purposely designed this way to make the player play the game more cautiously. One mistake, and you end up on the cutting room floor. In addition to simply trying to survive the game's numerous gang members also hunting the player, the game grades you on the execution of your takedowns, so those looking for the best outcome should definitely keep to the shadows. The brutality of the game is matched only by its difficulty. Stuntman.
This is not a life for the timid. This is where men and women challenge the impossible and make it happen before your eyes.
Cut, do it again. For all those who ever dreamed of being a stunt driver for movies growing up, Stuntman will make you rethink your career choices. Stuntman requires a level of perfection not seen since the tutorial level of the original Driver game, except it's the whole game. With the director's voice constantly in your ear, you need to follow his directions to the letter or be forced to reset and try the run all over again from the start because there are no checkpoints. Oftentimes, some of these demands happen mere seconds before you need to react, essentially forcing a restart unless you know the layout better than the director himself. The reward for all this is custom in-game movie trailers using the footage of the scenes you're driving for, but after everything it took to complete, a real paycheck would have been a better option.
And your favorite stunt? Well, that's always the next one you do. Never go into any stunt thinking anything else.
Shinobi.
We can do naught but wait and watch.
Come, let us begin.
Much like Maximo, Shinobi is another old-school side-scroller updated for the then-modern consoles with a 3D treatment that didn't lose any of its difficulty in the transition, and some would argue even raised the bar. With a sword that will constantly eat away at Hatsuma's health if he's not killing enemies, boss battles that require not only ninja-like reflexes but also pitch-perfect platforming skills, and virtually no checkpoint system to speak of, Shinobi manages to give even die-hard Sekiro players a challenge they weren't expecting. Those attempting this title unprepared have a better chance of becoming a real-life ninja than they do completing this game without breaking a controller. Vanquish.
Not even scratched. You did get some training in this thing, right?
Our simulators are very thorough.
Vanquish might be one of the greatest action games ever created, but you need to get past a pretty steep learning curve to fully enjoy it. The game has a ludicrous amount of mechanics and combat options available for the player, and early on in the heat of battle, it's pretty easy to get overwhelmed, and enemies will not take it easy on you just because it's your first time playing. Between the constant gunfire, explosions, and unending waves of enemies, your health will hit the critical line almost as soon as you step foot into the combat arena. Difficulty settings can help ease this frustration, but until the combat clicks with you, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle each time you pull the trigger.
Head for the control tower on the other side of the bridge.
Easy for you to say.
Catherine. On the surface, the most difficult part of Catherine is deciding which Catherine will be your Catherine. Unlike more traditional dating or life sims, Catherine forces the player to confront their decisions head-on in nightmare puzzle scenarios. Between juggling the multiple Catherines as well as other social situations, players are dropped onto massive puzzle walls in which they must plan their path up the wall of shifting blocks, all while the many layers collapse beneath them. This alone can already lead to many players scratching their heads with the increasing difficulty and stress of each puzzle. However, it's when the game wants you to not only find a way up, but do so while being pursued by monsters born of Vincent's subconscious. And you thought just navigating everyday life was a struggle.
I won't let you get away.
That voice. It's her.
Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance.
Mind if I got in? All we're saying, give war a chance!
Mostly leaving the series' trademark stealth tropes behind, Revengeance is by far one of the most high-octane and unrelenting action games of the last decade. With numerous enemy types, all with their own unique attack patterns and mechanics, even playing on normal difficulty will challenge even the most seasoned hack-and-slash fanatic. Bosses offer their own set of difficulties as well, with many leading to as many broken controllers as a typical Dark Souls playthrough. However, all of this is only exacerbated if players are unable to get a handle on the game's all-important parry mechanic. In some cases, many enemies and bosses simply cannot even be beaten without nailing this too crucial to overlook system. And even if you think you've mastered it, all it takes is one slip-up to send you back to the beginning of an intense boss encounter.
What the hell are you? Why don't you stick around and find out?
Terraria. While at first glance, Terraria might appear as a 2D Minecraft clone, it's more hardcore than Minecraft's hardcore mode. Terraria's procedurally generated world offers its own challenges, with each dive into the depths throwing new enemies and obstacles at the player. The desire to find and collect better items and gear constantly drives players to dig deeper, but the randomized enemy encounters, which are affected by time of day, depth, and sometimes just good old rotten luck, means that players will be fighting for every scrap they find. Even as players can recruit NPCs into the dungeons to offer much needed aid, these NPCs are often just as particular about where they're forced to set up shop or home base, and could end up even hindering the player's progress more than helping. Basically, everything in Terraria is actively fighting against the player, but that only seems to drive players to dig even deeper. XCOM Enemy Unknown.
You have been chosen to lead this initiative, to oversee our first and last line of defense.
For anyone familiar with the tactical strategy series XCOM, you already know what we're talking about. However, for those unaware, the first entry in the relaunched series Enemy Unknown is hard. The game allows you to completely customize your squad as they are sent out on missions to combat the many invading alien species, and despite your best laid plans, there's a very good chance not everyone is coming home thanks to the game's Perma-Death system. While the game's combat scenarios are the main focus, players will also need to research their enemy to develop better weapons and gear, as well as maintain their base operations, and depending on how well and how quickly they respond to threats, will affect how much money they receive for resources, or risk losing the support of the world's nations and losing the game through democracy. Seriously rough stuff.
Taken care of. All mission objectives completed.
Spelunky. We can't talk about Terraria without talking about another of the OGs of mining roguelikes, and Spelunky is arguably even more difficult than its contemporaries. Spelunky makes great use of its procedurally generated levels and punishes players for getting careless with its devastating permadeath system. Much like the best roguelikes, you don't win, you just do a little better each time. But Spelunky seems to revel in its difficulty, sending players back to the beginning with nothing but the basics to start all over again. The game refuses to hold players' hands, resulting in a steep learning curve which can immediately put off only the most die-hard roguelike enthusiasts. And the game's unrelenting waves of enemies can oftentimes force even the most dedicated to need a break. You're going to die, and die a lot, but you're going to have a hell of a good time doing it. Resistance 3. Insomniac's Resistance series might not have been the Halo killer Sony was hoping for, but over the course of 3 games, it managed to tell an incredibly engaging story of a worldwide alien invasion. While the first 2 games put players in the mutated boots of Nathan Hale, Resistance 3 set players out to travel across America as one of the last members of Hale's squad, Joseph Capelli, who also happens to be a normal human. Which means without the regenerative health fans of the series had become familiar with. This wasn't the only significant change either. While the game's arsenal made up for Joseph's lack of superhuman abilities, the Chimera were arguably their most dangerous and downright terrifying in the series' final entry. With overwhelming odds stacked against the player and Joseph 1 health pack away from death, Resistance 3 significantly upped not only the stakes, but also the challenge.
You ready to have some fun, boy?
Warhawk. Large-scale combat games are nothing new, but Warhawk encouraged players to become a jack-of-all-trades, master of none, with numerous gameplay mechanics players were expected to learn to fully enjoy the scale of Warhawk's battles. Everything from boots on the ground to vehicular and tank combat, as well as taking to the skies, were all available for players to engage in, so they could rise through the ranks to unlock better equipment and customization options. The massive scale of the battles themselves often led to a lot of frustration, as battles could often become so chaotic it was impossible to tell where you were being shot at from any given time, leading to a lot of unfair deaths and restarts. The forced use of the 6-axis motion controls also actively work against the player at all times, making certain flying controls almost impossible in the heat of battle. Trash Panic. Tetris is one of the most cloned puzzle games of all time, but Trash Panic manages to put an interesting spin on the genre. Instead of slotting a specific set of blocks into place, Trash Panic instead wants players to design their own blocks using a myriad of gadgets to smash, break, and bend their many pieces of rubbish into usable shapes to solve the escalating rows of refuse. This unique approach encourages experimentation and allows players to solve the puzzles their own way. But the further into the game you progress, and with the ever-increasing scale of the puzzles themselves, the more increasingly difficult the puzzles become, leading to some truly head-scratching moments that could have you throwing the game in the real bin for pickup. Drakengard 3.
You will die!
Before they created the incredibly successful Nier Automata, the same team was testing players' patience and goodwill with their Drakengard series, and arguably, their third entry is by far their most demanding. Featuring the traditional hack-and-slash combat fans of the genre are familiar with, the game demands near perfection in every combat encounter, despite the game's incredibly clunky implementation. Boss fights offer another substantial hurdle, as the game's combat system is especially unforgiving during these encounters, and even one slip-up can result in a game over screen. Drakengard 3 is also ridiculously grindy, requiring players to replay the same maps multiple times, and with frequent drops in the frame rate, the game's demanding combat becomes even more tedious and infuriating. Sadly, unlike their future success with Nier Automata, and despite an intriguing story if you stick it out, there's very little rewarding or worth the effort with this one.
I'm about to kill you anyway. That's all that matters.
God of War 3.
My vengeance ends now.
Kratos' final confrontation with the gods of the Greek pantheon was never going to be a cakewalk. As the God of War challenges and faces down each of the remaining gods, the stakes and difficulty continue to escalate. Even with Kratos' godlike powers and abilities, the sheer number of powerful basic enemies the game throws at you can make it extremely difficult to maintain the upper hand. Numerous mini-bosses will become regular enemies later on, and the game relishes in throwing multiple of these at Kratos at once alongside generic fodder foes in an attempt to overwhelm the player. Each boss often requires their own specific strategies, with the final confrontation with Zeus proving to be an especially demanding multi-stage gauntlet. On higher difficulties, this can oftentimes result in near impossible odds and can leave even the most dedicated enthusiast contemplating lowering the difficulty.
You disappoint me, Spartan.
Tokyo Jungle. Survival games pit the player against the elements and tell them to survive by any means necessary, and will often give them the tools for their survival. In Tokyo Jungle, however, not only do you battle the elements, but the food chain itself. The game features numerous roguelike elements like Perma-Death, meaning your little creature is literally fighting for their life as they explore the world and scavenge for food, while narrowly surviving encounters with creatures just as hungry, but far deadlier. The species you start the game with also has a direct effect on the game's difficulty, as playing the game as a herbivore will make you prey for almost every other species in the game. The game also doesn't scale difficulty, making it all too easy to be minding your own business and end up face to face with a hungry lion that will send your little critter back to the start screen. Wipeout HD. Racing games tend to offer their own version of difficulty that usually revolves more around the difficulty of your opponents rather than the race itself. While Wipeout HD still offers this option to a point, the game is still relentlessly aggressive against the player. The speed at which players whip around the track is almost impossible to comprehend, often leading to the player ping-ponging off the walls and restarting the race rather than playing catch-up. Wipeout HD is also very lenient when it comes to teaching players the intricacies of its mechanics, leading to quite a lot of frustration until they find the sweet spot and are able to effortlessly glide around the track at breakneck speed. You'll find your moment of zen, but you're going to have to fight for it.
Race complete. Gold medal awarded.
Killzone 2.
I'm sure we all wish our brave men and women good luck and Godspeed.
Another Halo killer that ended up as a solid franchise, Killzone 2 is not only the series' strongest entry, but also its most challenging. Killzone 2 actively encourages the player to seek cover from the unrelenting gunfire of the Helgen forces. With this new focus on cover-based gameplay, the cover system is not only somewhat uneven, but cover is also temporary and can be rapidly destroyed if you don't continuously stay on the move. However, considering the player is invading the planet of Helgen this time and the enemy is on their native turf, the opposing numbers are far greater. The enemy AI's sole focus on the player while almost completely ignoring the rest of your squad further adds to this frustration. Killzone might very well be one of the most realistic depictions of actual combat, with the amount of sheer chaos and death raining down from every direction and death a single lucky bullet away. Heavenly Sword.
But I wielded the heavenly sword, savored the grace and fury in my blows, never once forgetting what I was offering for such power.
While initially dismissed as a God of War clone, Heavenly Sword still has its fair share of fans, but few can argue that one of Ninja Theory's first titles has the same polish as the God of War series. Much of the game's difficulty stems simply from the game being unbalanced and the camera being a greater threat to the player than the enemies themselves. That's not to say the game itself can't be challenging. Many of the game's boss fights will test even the most dedicated fans' patience, especially the big bad King Bohan himself. The game throws multiple powerful enemies at the player simultaneously, and given the titular sword's limited range, it's all too easy to get caught in a down state you can't recover from. The secondary character Kai is also especially frustrating given her lack of defense and focus on imprecise sniping controls.
Hell is waiting for you, Noriko. It's calling you home.
Helldivers. Long before Helldivers 2 became the legendary fight for democracy and ultimate combat simulator fans know and love today, the original Helldivers offered players a different perspective on the fight for democracy. A top-down twin-stick shooter, Helldivers would relentlessly overrun players and their squad with innumerable bugs and other enemies just waiting to squash your efforts to save the galaxy. As in real combat scenarios, ammo management is key as well as managing friendly fire, as it's all too easy to end up as the last man standing if you get careless with your spray and pray. While not nearly as intense as its modern counterpart, Helldivers still offers enough challenge to get the blood pumping, the palms sweaty, and the knees weak, all in the name of democracy. Hotline Miami. Gamers have been conditioned over the years to bust in guns blazing and emerge as the complete and total video game badass that they are. Well, Hotline Miami said not anymore. While you can still break into every room guns blazing, this is a quick and easy way to get sent back to the start screen. Enemies are relentless, and the 1 HP of the player means death is always watching just over your shoulder. Nailing a perfect run oftentimes requires numerous tries, and memorizing the layout of the rooms, as well as the enemy placement, adds additional strategic depth alongside its glorious pixelated ballet of blood. Hotline Miami will test every ounce of will you have, and if you even attempt to get on the leaderboards, the game can and will become the main source of stress in your life. Ninja Gaiden Sigma.
I see you have made it this far.
Ninja Gaiden was Dark Souls before Dark Souls, and Ninja Gaiden Sigma, the PS3 exclusive port of Ninja Gaiden Black, remains not only the best version of the game in the series, but also its most challenging. punishingly difficult, oftentimes to the point of being unfair, Sigma somehow managed to up the stakes from the original with its new powerful versions of enemies, bizarre implementation of the much maligned PS3 6-axis controls, and additional chapters with all new bosses. The game focused more on precision strikes than a traditional hack and slasher, but still threw multiple enemies at the player at once, leaving very little room for any mistake or even a counterattack. And the fixed camera angles make it all too easy to be struck or killed by some enemy or projectile fired from off-screen. The Ninja Gaiden series has a reputation for its crushing difficulty, and only the truest ninjas can complete the game unharmed.
With your own flesh and blood to sacrifice, receive now your awakening.
Hardcore Uprising. For our money, there's no old school series more difficult than Contra, so naturally a spiritual successor to that bullet hell would make the list of the most difficult PS3 games. Hell, the term hardcore is right there in the title. 2D run-and-gun shooters have been testing players' skills and patience since the days of the NES, and Hardcore Uprising continues that tradition with great enthusiasm. Besides the typical onslaught of enemies and artillery assaulting players from every direction, players will also need to contend with back-to-back boss fights that can easily send you back to the start of a level, as the game offers no checkpoints in between. Couple this with numerous unexpected QuickTime events, and hardcore truly is only for the most hardcore. At the very least, you can still use the classic Konami code for whatever little assistance that might offer. Demon's Souls.
Brave soul who fears not death.
While the original Dark Souls easily could have taken this spot, we're giving the nod to the OG Demon Souls that introduced the world to the phrase, "get good." For those taking their first steps into the world of Volteria, Demon Souls seems to actively work against the player. Even basic enemies can easily lay you out for even the most minor mistakes, and the lore is so obtuse and hidden, you could often find yourself at a loss for what all this suffering is for. However, for those who persevere, Demon Souls became more rewarding the more you play, forcing the player to come to grips with the game's mechanics to survive, reminiscent of older generation RPGs that didn't hold the player's hand. While understandably not for everyone, given the game's difficulty curve, Demon Souls is one of the most difficult but rewarding experiences for those who live long enough to get good.
Remnant from the Ashes.
Have you the heart? Astounding. I am uncomfortably in your debt. I will rectify that.
On the surface, Remnant from the Ashes looks like it's just another Dark Souls clone. All you have to do is study the enemy and look for those parry windows, right? Well, that's only a part of the equation. Remnant places a much heavier focus on switching between weapons and managing your resources. You can't just rely on one specific tactic over and over and over again. You have to make full use of the weapons you carry. Plus, you can make the game even harder for yourself by playing the randomized variant of the main game. Really, don't jump into this thinking you can just exploit dexterity and bleed, alright? That's not gonna save you here. Yakuza Like a Dragon.
You calling me a masochist? Hell yeah. You always let him get some punches in, even when you could wipe the floor with them.
Early on, Yakuza Like a Dragon makes some pretty explicit references to Dragon Quest, and this isn't just to present the idea of the series going turn-based RPG. Yakuza Like a Dragon is very much similar to Dragon Quest in gameplay, in format, and especially in difficulty. Even if you're just gunning for the main story, you are more than likely to run into a wall that's going to lay the smackdown on you, be it a boss or just a super tough common enemy. Much like the classic Enix games that inspired it, Yakuza Like a Dragon almost makes farming a requirement just to match the might of later foes. Pace yourself properly, and maybe you won't have to spend extensive sessions fighting the same groups of fodder over and over again. Cuphead.
You're up!
This is probably not news to many of you, but Cuphead truly is a difficult game. And we don't mean, oh, I can't jump dash across the tutorial gap hard. For new players, the early game bosses are easy enough to slowly learn what the game expects of you, but once you reach the second and the third islands, the ball starts rolling fast, probably faster than you can keep up with. You got Grim Matchstick, Dr. Call's Robot, Wally Warble, Rumor Honeybottoms, so many bosses that have filtered out one player or another, and every single person who has played Cuphead has found their own bane of existence. I know, Grim Matchstick took me an entire afternoon to get through. I hated that guy. And the challenge ramps up drastically once you start playing Delicious Last Course. That's one of the most maddening DLCs I've ever seen. Devil May Cry 5.
Oh, I get it. Who brought the marshmallows? 'Cause I'm bringing the fire.
For die-hard DMC fans, maybe DMC 5 isn't super hard compared to earlier titles. However, that doesn't completely negate why it should or shouldn't be on this list. One thing we noticed with DMC 5 is just how the game leans harder into precise execution and maintaining a high combo count. You really have to pull off a spectacular performance in order to hit the high ranks and get out of fights with very few scuffs. But honestly, we'd expect nothing less from DMC, so if we have to get good, we're more than happy to do so.
Or the sea to a fish, so is contempt to the contemptible.
Ion Fury. You can find a litany of boomer shooters to test your might, from Proteus to Nightmare Reaper to Warhammer 40k Bolt Gun, but Ion Fury is a special level of difficulty on account of how limited resources can be, even under normal. For context, Ion Fury's various weapons have alt fires that are significantly more powerful than your standard fire. However, these alt fires can eat up more of your ammunition as a result. So you get carried away on all those alt fires, and you'll soon find yourself without any means to defend. Unless you can actually make use of Shelly's only melee weapon.
Oh, it's so cute.
The Witness. Whereas the other games on our list are tougher in means of input, timing, and execution, The Witness is a different kind of difficulty. It's not parry windows, it's not complex combos, not even enemy aggression or resource management. No, it is trying to figure out what in God's green earth the game even wants you to do. The first two sections of puzzles might be easy enough to understand, but the rest? You're probably going to keep messing with things until something finally clicks, or you're just going to pull up a guide out of frustration. Either way, The Witness is likely going to annoy you depending on your appreciation of puzzle design. Broforce. One aspect of Broforce that makes the game tough is the fact that you can die in a single hit. Very Contra-esque if you ask us. But that's not even the reason why Broforce is a difficult game, and the enemies aren't the reason either. What makes Broforce so challenging is the amount of destruction you can inflict on the level. It is very easy to get carried away when firing on enemies, but get too reckless, and you risk making progression harder to achieve. Suddenly, easy jumps are farther away or higher up than they were before, and if you're using a bro that has an awkward playstyle than the ones you're used to, Broforce can wind up being a real struggle. Doom Eternal.
You cannot resist the will of the Khan Maker.
Activating the portal now.
For it was you who was meant to enforce it.
Everyone has their own reason for saying why Doom Eternal is hard. Some point the finger at the Marauders that bring the game's pacing to a crawl. Some blame the tentacles that can seemingly land very cheap shots. Some will complain about the annoying as hell Archviles, which seem to be even more oppressive than they were in Doom 2. But one aspect everybody can agree on is the resource management. Doom Eternal makes it feel like you are always running out of ammo, forcing you to use the chainsaw every so often. This part of the game can be obnoxious or thrilling depending on who you ask. Regardless, this is a PS4 game that almost everybody agrees is hard. Just what about the game makes it harder for you? Your mileage may vary.
Hear me, Slayer. When his heart is laid to rest, then his soul will be at peace. And so will mine.
Hollow Knight. Despite its cutesy appearance, Hollow Knight has gained some notoriety for being more challenging than it initially implies. Late game boss fights are often referenced, yet few seem to talk about the main gameplay elements that actually make Hollow Knight a tough game. In addition to some tricky platforming in various sections, the game really doesn't give you a ton of leeway in attacking and defending. You only get one attack to use, with no ability to block or properly dodge other attacks. You'll have to move normally or jump to avoid taking damage. What's worse is that some enemies come equipped with armor, meaning you'll have no means of staggering, stunning, or instantly breaking armor. You're just gonna have to be patient and make do and power through. Darkest Dungeon.
An ambush. Send these vermin a message. The rightful owner has returned, and their kind is no longer welcome.
Oppressive is the perfect way to describe Darkest Dungeon, and it's either going to frustrate you or encourage you. The thing about Darkest Dungeon is that you essentially have 2 health bars to keep an eye on between each party member. You have one that indicates their physical health, while the other indicates their mental health. Obviously, if they take too much physical damage, your party member dies. There's not really much you can do about it. But if they exceed their mental health bar twice, you reach a moment where one of 2 things will happen. Either your character reaches some sort of awakening and gains a substantial boost in stats and abilities, or they go insane and become a major detriment to your journey with significantly harmful traits. More often than not, they're gonna go insane, and that alone is what makes Darkest Dungeon so aggravating. Neo. We could easily wrap this entry up by saying it's Souls-like, so of course it's hard. However, there is more to it than that. Yes, Neo does hold the same level of difficulty as From Software's games, but with more of a focus on enemy variety. Though some enemies may repeat, the mixing and matching of them can create new and interesting challenges. And hey, if you manage to beat this one, you do have a whole sequel to jump into immediately after that. And yes, it does ramp up the difficulty. Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. Now, in all honesty, this collection of the classic Crash games remade are the easiest games on our list. So why put them here? Well, it's that the platforming managed to become harder by complete accident. Some of you may remember back when Insane Trilogy launched, many were questioning whether developer Vicarious Visions somehow made the game harder intentionally, or if some of us were starting to show our age. Myself was among the many. Turns out that for the remake, Crash was rendered as a rounded object, whereas the original iterations on the PlayStation 1 were rendering Crash as a block object. This is why Insane Trilogy feels like Crash is always slipping off edges, and it's also why completing all 3 games was a lot tougher than before. Dead Cells. Dead Cells is certainly a tricky action platformer. For starters, you will need to thoroughly explore the land to increase your stats and increase them according to the kind of build you're going for. However, there are also rewards tied to reaching the end of one region within a set time or defeating a certain number of enemies without taking damage. Speedrunners and those who crave the no damage run will find plenty of challenge here, especially since Dead Cells has seen several expansions, including one that crosses over with Konami's legendary Castlevania franchise. And there's also been a couple of updates that add playable guest characters. Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. You can absolutely play Wolfenstein 2 on whatever difficulty you so desire, but if, for whatever reason, you have the raging urge to ram your head into a wall, well, crank the difficulty up and see how long you survive. Wolfenstein 2's I Am Death Incarnate difficulty means enemies can down you in just a couple of shots, and if you somehow beat the game on that, you can try the secret Mein Leben difficulty, which is Perma-Death mode. No autosaves, no manual saves, die once and you have to do the whole game from the very beginning. And if you're a trophy hunter, you will need to do this difficulty to get the platinum. Have fun! Enter the Gungeon. Granted, the developers at Dodge Roll have balanced the game a bit more since Enter the Gungeon initially launched. However, this bullet hell dungeon crawler can still make a player sweat. Of course, what else would you expect from a literal bullet hell? Thing is that it isn't just the bullets that you'll have to worry about, you need to make sure you're finding decent weaponry to make a balanced loadout for yourself. Every gun functions differently than the rest, from damage output to fire rate to even the amount of ammo it holds. Make the most of every chamber before you move to the next, and you might be able to finally kill your past. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Look, we promise that this list isn't going to be loaded with From Software titles. Everyone knows their games are hard. It isn't news. But Sekiro does deserve recognition because of how differently it plays than Dark Souls. Dodge rolling isn't going to save you like it has in the past. You need to be smart in your stealth and know how to make use of the world's verticality to your advantage. There's more of a focus in studying the environment and knowing when to strike. So if you haven't played Sekiro yet, don't go charging head first. Hitman: World of Assassination. Many of you may simply know these games as Hitman 2016, Hitman 2, and Hitman 3. With all three being lumped into a single package as of January 2023, we felt it appropriate to put them as a single entry. Moving forward, this collection of stealth games will test your critical thinking and planning. You will be given a target to eliminate every mission, but will stumble across many obstacles preventing you from getting an easy kill. Each level presents a variety of methods to dispatch your target too. However, taking too long on one method might force you to improvise and deviate from your original plan. If you want a challenge in carrying out cunning kills, these are definitely the games to check out.
Master the art of assassination, and nothing can stop you.
Monster Hunter World. Have you ever tried to play a Monster Hunter game solo? It's nearly impossible and unnecessarily elongates missions. What about in a full party? Easier, but not by much. Playing Monster Hunter World with people requires everyone to understand their roles, the mechanics of their weapons, and knowing when to jump in for attacks. As fights go on, you're all going to have to adapt accordingly to prevent your target from running away or unleashing a powerful attack. And make sure no one gets lost. Those maps can be confusing sometimes, so best to stick together.
You did it, partner! Okay, I'll be waiting over by this ladder.
XCOM 2. Anyone who has played XCOM 2 knows exactly why this is here. How many times have our soldiers proved their incompetence after missing a shotgun blast from point-blank range? Too many! And for some reason, every soldier feels highly prone to failure regardless of the chance of success. To make things even more frustrating, XCOM 2 is not afraid to start shoving borderline OP enemies within the first couple of missions. Looking at you, mind-benders, or whatever you're called, the aliens that can take control of your soldiers. Get ready to run the gauntlet on this one. It's gonna be a painful one. Bloodborne. Look, it was an obvious choice. Bloodborne has long been known to be the hardest game on PlayStation 4, if not the hardest game From Software has ever put out. The enemies hit hard, the bosses hit harder, and it's easy to get yourself killed in the dumbest ways possible. On top of that, the enemy variety is so uniquely diverse that no area ever feels like it's reusing the same enemies from previous environments. But what makes the game especially tough today? That frame rate. Sony, dudes, when are we getting a PS5 iteration? The 60 frames is sorely needed here. Come on now. Baldur's Gate 3.
What are you doing? I'm alive, yes. Thank you for the concern.
On the surface, Baldur's Gate 3 looks like it would play like your average tactical RPG. The only exception being the movement doesn't restrict you to a grid, you know, like most tactical RPGs. But the differences go a lot deeper than that. Firstly, the wide variety of status ailments can throw you off if you aren't familiar with the intricacies of tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons. Second, the AI is not going to let you off the hook easy, even in the early game, so expect plenty of missed ranged attacks and maybe a downed ally or two, assuming you aren't trying to lone wolf it, which we don't recommend. Please don't do that. It's not smart. Retro Realms, Halloween, and Evil Dead. Retro Realms is enticing enough to attract just about any Halloween or Evil Dead fan. Unfortunately, some folks may not have been too happy with how obscenely unfair the game can get. The key to completing Retro Realms is by switching between dimensions. Jumping between the normal world and the nightmarish demon world will be required every once in a while to progress normally. However, finding every secret will require you to use it way more often than usual. The worst part about this is that because the game is running both worlds at the same time, you can easily wind up spawning right in front of an enemy and get hit before you can even react. Honestly, it's not the most fair game WayForward has ever developed. Lies of P.
Ah, there you are. I've been looking all over for you.
Now, those familiar with Lies of P can already summarize this with a simple, oh, this game plays like this other game. And Lies of P certainly does play like one of From Software's famous titles, but the main reason why NeoWiz and Round 8's game is so difficult is because of the massive enemy variety. It often feels like every corner you turn in Krat hides some new enemy you've never seen before or just haven't seen enough of. In other words, you are constantly learning something new and having to adjust to the situation at hand. Metaphor ReFantazio.
They saw us! On your toes, everyone!
While Atlus has certainly developed tougher games before, looking at you, Shin Megami Tensei, Metaphor ReFantazio is the hardest game they've put out in recent years. No, this is not just some, oh, it's Persona but other thing kind of game. Metaphor gives the player more control over their party formation than any other game Atlus has made. You can have characters change archetypes that can affect their stats, abilities, and how often certain enemies may attack them. On top of that, you have to be mindful of whether your characters are at the front of battle or hanging back. Both of these aspects of Metaphor's combat can be a tad confusing for some folks, and it can be easy to mess up the party if you aren't thinking over your battle strategy carefully.
Not done yet. Oh, please.
9 Souls. One may dismiss 9 Souls as a 2D Dark Souls or a Hollow Knight clone, but honestly, some may find this game to be harder than either of those titles. Unlike Team Cherry's renowned gem, 9 Souls gives the player more tools to dodge and execute unique attacks. Problem is that the game feel is certainly not going to jive with some players. There are definitely some hitboxes that don't look quite right, and the parry mechanic certainly doesn't function the same way as other action platformers or action RPGs. Needless to say, there absolutely is a steep learning curve that is going to require a ton of patience from the player, perhaps more than some are willing to give. Helldivers 2. The first Helldivers game was already notorious for its intense levels of difficulty. Helldivers 2, on the other hand, kind of blows its predecessor out of the water. And we're not just saying that because of the different camera perspective. Between the physics, the environmental hazards, and the friendly fire, there are so many stupid ways to get yourself killed that don't always involve the enemies themselves. Things can get especially stressful when you're trying to input codes to drop additional firepower and supplies onto the battlefield mid-fight. That said, you are always going to feel like you're in a bind and left wondering, how are you even still alive?
Request approved. Deploying reinforcements.
Claire Obscure Expedition 33.
If you're gonna give someone flowers, you should probably do it before they wither and die.
What, the flower? Or Sophie?
Ooh, dark. Sophie would approve.
Though it isn't the most brutal turn-based RPG we have ever played, that doesn't mean Claire Obscure is this super easy cakewalk in comparison. One may point to the many different combat mechanics that can make the game confusing for less experienced players. Most have pointed the finger to the dodge and parry windows as the main reason why they keep dying. Indeed, Claire Obscure's dodge and parry windows are super picky, and they do require precise timing to pull off. While dodging is slightly easier to perform, much of the game depends on your ability to parry, as that will get you out of combat faster and more efficiently. Our advice? Use the spar match against Mael during the prologue to try and get a grasp on the mechanics as early as possible. Trust me, it will help you immensely by the time you hit Act 1. And you don't suffer any consequences for losing, so keep at it.
Well, you sure smell real enough.
No, I don't.
Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake.
Hey, you. Still can't believe this day's finally here.
The original Dragon Quest III is already a super tough game, tougher than the original 2 games. Though the remake does offer some features that make things slightly easier, it doesn't change much in the combat and difficulty scaling. Enemies can still hit just as hard as they did on NES, and the way some weapons function differently than the rest can impede or accelerate your progress depending on how your party is operating. Some players may also wind up frustrated with their AI party members if they're allowing them to act independently. Really, this classic is not for the easily agitated. The first Berserker, Kazan.
さあ、その肉体回復したぞ。感じるか、冥界の力を。
Of all the games that released in 2025, many folks found the first Berserker to be grueling to endure. Fun, but grueling. Despite looking and playing like a From Software game, the first Berserker is a physical and mental test of endurance, specifically when it comes to boss fights. Just a couple of hits from a boss can be enough to put you at death's door, and even when you're landing several meaty hits, you may not be knocking off huge chunks of health as other action RPGs would allow. Your patience will be tested, so it's important that you try not to rush through boss fights and get greedy when they're getting low on health. Ninja Gaiden 2 Black.
誰か、誰やろう、このゼドニアスに他ならん。
そいつは初耳だ。
We spent so many years begging for the return of the 3D Ninja Gaiden games. We finally managed to get a new version of Ninja Gaiden 2, but some of us wound up regretting that wish after playing this one. Ninja Gaiden 2 Black is so unnecessarily punishing at times, between bosses turtling and enemies being able to chip off parts of your health bar, that you cannot recover unless you heal in very specific ways. The second level will especially test your BS tolerance as enemies appear from trapdoors, walls, and around corners of super narrow hallways. This is definitely a game you should play at your own risk. You may not feel the same about Ninja Gaiden after this. Demon Souls. Was this the first game you thought of when we started this list? It was for us too. It's kind of the obvious choice if you want a PS5 game that can go hard on you early in the game. That isn't a complaint either. Demon Souls can be great fun, especially if you're playing with friends. The only reason some might disagree is if one may not be familiar with the format of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and the like. Plus, From Software fans have often stated how Demon Souls, even in its remake form, is significantly harder than the rest of the Soulsborne games. God of War Ragnarok.
Got him!
Of course, we could lump everything into the gimme God of War difficulty because why not? I mean, we could just say, yeah, play it on that difficulty and call it a day. However, Ragnarok might be more challenging for some due to occasionally clunky movement and camera placement. And by the time Atreus or Mimir warn you of an enemy attacking behind you, more often than not, it's already too late. It can sometimes make combat more challenging than it probably should be, and if you plan to take on King Hrolf and the rest of the optional berserkers, you're in for a rough time. Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time.
Crash Bandicoot. At last, I, the great Neocortex, have you right where I want you.
Crash 4 was super tough on PS4. Spoiler alert, even with a higher frame rate, the story is no different on PS5. At first, you won't have too much trouble so long as you aren't trying to blaze through every level on your first go, but the later levels might be frustrating for some. From Dingodile's awkward controls to the final few levels chasing after Cortex, Crash 4 can get a bit too demanding at times. And if you want to go for that 100% completion, you will have to beat every single level without dying and go for all of the platinum relics. Ghost Runner. Ghost Runner is absolutely one of the toughest indie games we've played within the last few years. Strange thing is that it isn't even hard in terms of figuring out what to do. For the most part, the difficulty lies within the controls. Just about every action you'll need to do is tied to the shoulder buttons and triggers, and it doesn't exactly feel natural. Sure, you can remap buttons through the PS5 itself, but regardless of how you configure it, it rarely ever seems to make much sense. The game is excellent, don't twist our words, but those controls, man, they take a little bit of getting used to. And I'm somebody who plays a lot of different games with different control schemes. Like a Dragon, Ishin.
後で報いは受けてやる。だがお前らにも女を殴った報いを受けさせてやる。この命知らずが。かかってこい。
The Yakuza... The Like a Dragon series typically leaves the difficulty up to the player. You can play on baby easy goo goo gaga mode, or bump up the challenge to normal or hard, or even the legend difficulty if you're shooting for a tougher New Game Plus. Or if you just wanna, brag about the size of your gonads, but you do you. But Ishin introduces its own harder difficulty, dubbed, Ishin. Under this, enemies deal significantly more damage and take several hits before finally going down. Bosses, on the other hand, can down you in 1 or 2 hits. Ryuga Gotoku made it so hard that they warn you before beginning the game under the Ishin difficulty, recommending you only play this difficulty when going for New Game Plus. You might want to take that advice. Just saying. Monster Hunter Rise. Funny for us to say that Monster Hunter Rise is hard when many would point it out as the easiest Monster Hunter game in the entire franchise. However, even with that reputation, many are still quick to say it can be quite challenging under various circumstances. Many of the changes in difficulty come primarily in the form of refinement in UI and controls. You still have plenty of formidable beasts to hunt down, and none are gonna go down without a fight. That said, the same level of challenge found in previous games still remains in Monster Hunter Rise. Menus and controls just aren't as cumbersome as previous entries. But don't expect it to be a cakewalk either. Marvel's Midnight Suns. Midnight Suns will kick your ass. Sorry to come out with the most blunt statement about it, but it is the honest truth. At first, the combat can feel very restrictive, as you can only play so many cards each turn. Plus, interacting with the environment and using some cards will cost you heroism. In other words, the order you play cards and perform actions can drastically affect the outcome of a battle if you play cards too recklessly.
I'm gonna get you!
And if you haven't been spending a good amount of time in the Abbey, you may run into some fights where your fighters feel severely underpowered. Careful and efficient planning is key to beating Midnight Suns. Trust me, I'm speaking from personal experience here. I'm still not done with the game. I have just the 3rd act left, at least at the time of this recording, and it is still incredibly hard, even at normal difficulty, and I have a ton of upgraded cards. Just find your tactics, and you'll be able to take on just about anything. It won't be easy, but it'll at least be easier than if you played it like a regular card game. Neo 2.
And we must all one day leave it.
Simply Google, "Is Neo 2 hard?" and you will find no shortage of players having a harder time with this game compared to its predecessor. Unlike most of our other entries with their complex mechanics or high demands for completion bonuses, Neo 2 gets its notorious reputation for difficulty in a simpler fashion. Enemy variety. There are way more enemies with their own patterns than there were in the first game, meaning you cannot approach a combat encounter the same way as a previous one. Well, for the most part anyways. Returnal. Only Housemarque would develop a game so excruciating. We mean that in a positive light, by the by. Returnal is easily the hardest PS5 game to come from Sony's first-party studios. To elaborate, bullet hell games are typically done with a top-down view, allowing the player to see just about every projectile on the screen. This gives them enough time to react and adjust their position. But Returnal, as you can see, does not use that, and instead uses an over-the-shoulder camera, which obstructs a good portion of your vision on one side. With so many projectiles flying all over the place, you may as well throw no damage runs out the window. My friend Peppa Pig.
I know. Why don't you help me, Pip?
Help Peppa and Grandpa grow a new plant in the garden.
It's a real test in mental fortitude with this brat following you around. And I can't believe I platinumed this game twice. No, our final entry is actually Elden Ring. It is no surprise that Elden Ring, despite the noticeably large number of players who have earned the Platinum Trophy, is the toughest game to play on PlayStation 5. While the game does give you plenty of freedom to build your character how you want and explore just about any location to your heart's content, there are moments where your stats will affect how challenging certain fights are. If you haven't been investing your stats wisely, you might end up ramming your head into a wall. A strategy guide is almost required if you aren't familiar with From Software's previous games. You thought Demon's Souls was tough? You ain't seen nothing yet, bud.
PlayStation. Thanks for watching. Check out more gaming videos right here.